Hello, students. Today, our discussion will be on the Partition of Bengal from 1905 to 1911. But before we discuss the Partition of Bengal, we need to understand the background of the Indian civilization because Indian civilization or the Indian subcontinent had always been united with diverse group of people who were Indians, and India is known for its unity in diversity, as I have discussed in my previous lectures. So, as I said, we need to know the historical background of India before we uh, try to understand the partition of Bengal, where the British started their political strategy of divide and rule, dividing the Hindus and Muslims who have been united for a long, long time, but for the reason of their colonization and exploitation, they started their strategy of divide and rule. So, about the Indian civilization, it goes back to about 2500 BC, where we see the formation of the Harappan culture. The Harappan culture emerged as an urban society with a system of writing and town planning. 1,000 years later, the Aryans, or the Irons, as some people say, brought the North a culture and ritual that later became the basis of Hinduism. The 6th century BC in India witnessed the rise of Buddhism and Jainism together with the process of political consolidation. For example, in about 320 BC, the Mauryas came to power. Their empire under Ashoka embraced almost the whole of India and Afghanistan. The classical period of Hindu art, literature, and science reached its peak during the Gupta period from 320 to 647 AD. Then we see from the 5th to the 13th century, India witnessed the rise of many kingdoms. In 1206, a Muslim sultanate was established in India, in Delhi. The spread of Islam in India dates back to this period. As a matter of fact, Islam reached India in the 7th century through the traders, through the Arab traders who came to India for trading purposes in the 7th century. And that's how India came to be known as, came familiar with the Muslims. So, but the Muslim Sultanate and the ruling kingdom, it started from the 13th century. In the 16th century, which is in 1526, the Mughal Empire was established. In the 1600s, or we can say in the 17th century, the Europeans established trade agreements with the Mughal. And taking advantage of the disintegration of the Mughal Empire in the 1700s, or in the 18th century, as we can say, the British East India Company manipulated conflicts between the members of the ruling family of Bengal and defeated the Nawab of Bengal in 1757. In 1765, the company got the Diwani, or the right to administer the revenues of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. which in effect made it the ruler of eastern India. It was the beginning of the empire building for the British colonizers, which saw large parts of India annexed to its territorial rule by the company in 1856. With widespread discontent among the Indians against the English, resulted in the revolt of 1857, which is also known as the Sepoy Mutiny, or which is also known as the First War of Independence. However, the Indians failed due to their lack of planning, coordination, and united leadership. In 1858, the Crown took over the government of India from the East India Company. So now the British government, the British Crown, came to rule India. So, all along before the advent of the British, we find that the Hindu and Muslims of India lived together, practiced their respective religion. Their composite culture developed by a process of mutual adaptation. There was a lot of give and take in language, manners, and customs, and even religion. The contribution of Hindu and Muslims, as well as other religions, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, Christianity, has been significance to the it was quite significant to the Indian civilization. The Hindus contributed to literature, mathematics, and philosophy, while music, art, and architecture reflected Mughal glory. But, as I said, the things of unity involving unity, or that the Indians were one people, took a different turn with the advent of the British rule in India. In the 19th century, when Great Britain enjoyed a naval supremacy, as it became a very powerful naval power, and so that's the reason it immersed itself or absorbed itself for colonization. And that is why there has been the race theory, the theory of Darwinism, the theory of social Darwinism, which justified colonization, which held that the Caucasian race or the white race, the Caucasian race are the white skin with blue eyed, they are the top of the racial group, of the entire racial group, and the bottom of the entire racial group or the race ladder was the African Americans or the Aboriginals or the dark colored people. So the Caucasian race, the Europeans, particularly the British, of course, France, Portugal, and other European countries were also colonizers, but in the context of India, the British colonized many countries in Asia and Africa. In India, Great Britain pursued the policy of imperialism based on exploitation. It was ruthless, but it made Britain rich and powerful. India has been conquered before. Say, for example, the Mughals. But the invaders who settled in India made themselves a part of their lives. They developed India. They were very passionate about their rule in India. They developed the administration, the roads and infrastructure and everything we can say about they worked for the betterment of the Indian society. So, India, under them, say for example, the Mughals, never lost its independence. It had never been enslaved. But with the coming of the British power, the entire dynamics of the Indian society changed, which I should say, unfortunately, there have been many shifts, many changes, but all was focused on exploitation, manipulation, so that the British government can benefit from their rule in their colonized country, which was India. So the British believed economic exploitation went hand in hand with political exploitation, which eventually impoverished India. During the 19th century, globally there was a lot of changes taking place. There was the rise of nationalism. For example, the spirit of nationalism could be traced in Europe with the unification of Germany and the unification of Italy. So, through these global positive changes, people in India were also becoming politically aware and becoming politically conscious, and and we would see the rise of nationalism among the Indians under the British rule. So, on one hand, the colonial British government tried to exploit, I would say they exploited, not tried, they exploited India, wanted to suppress and silence the Indians, but on the other hand, the Indians took the Western education, they educated themselves, they learned to speak the language, and then they could stand for their rights. And we will see the rise of nationalism with the partition of Bengal in 1905. So, for example, with the rise of nationalism, we may have an example of Surendranath Banerjee, who was inspired by the Italian leader Mazzini's patriotism, and he was following Mazzini's ideals and sought to achieve Indian unity through an association he established in 1876. So we can see the changes coming to India. Surendranath Banerjee also took a tour of India to unify educated Indians on the basis of common political interest and to promote friendship between the Hindus and the Muslims. But the imperialist British government, they took some repressive measures, and one of them was the decision of Partition of Bengal. In 1885, the Indian National Congress was established, and the Indian National Congress became quite vocal on the exploitation of the colonial British government. So the Congress, in their several sessions, dealt with the unfair burden of British military expenditure, manipulation of foreign exchange to the detriment of the Indian economy, high expenses of administration, heavy taxation, tariff policy, and excise duties. So, as the Congress was getting aware, and that's where the colonial British government's fear was. And initially, the Hindu Indians, were the British government's favored people. So, because by the end of the 19th century, the Hindus adapted themselves to Western learning, became politically conscious, and practically monopolized the higher offices of the state. But again, it was somewhat a disastrous turn for the Muslims because the Muslims, compared to the Indians, were much behind. They were proud of their glorious past. They were not rational enough to think that they need to make a progress to compete with the other Indians for the position. It's just that they were, some of them were very conservative and traditionalist, wouldn't want any Western changes, and would not go for education. And that's where Sir Syed Ahmed Khan, he intervened to give the Muslims a separate identity. He devoted himself to the promotion of English education among the Muslims, and in 1875, Sir Syed Ahmed Khan founded the Mohammedan Anglo Oriental College of Aligarh. Sir Syed Ahmed Khan urged the Muslim to stay aloof from the Congress and that the Muslims should cooperate with the British because Sir Syed Ahmed Khan had the vision that in order to get the favor of the British, Muslims really need to work hard and they need to compete with the far more educationally progressed Hindus. That doesn't mean that he was against the Hindu education. It just meant that he really felt for the backwardness of the Muslim Indians. He wanted the Muslim Indians to make progress through Western education and move on and integrate with the British government and be a part of the British administration. So this was the situation before the partition of Bengal, and it is said that the partition of Bengal paved the way to the partition of India, which took place in 1947. Because we will see that from the partition of Bengal in 1905, there was this rise of nationalism among the Indians with the Hindus and the Muslims, and it was a really very a massive change in the Indian society how they stood for their rights. There was sometimes Hindu-Muslim unity. Sometimes in the 1940s there was disunity because of the leadership struggle, leadership differences of opinion, and but eventually India was partitioned, and which was British came to India, which was one whole India, but when they left India, they divided it. So through their manipulation and exploitation, they really looked into their benefit, but they did not look to the benefit of the Indians as a whole. So, in the partition of India, we will see that in the partition of Bengal, we will see why the Muslims and the Hindus, how they reacted. So, as I said, the Hindu Indians were far more progressive than the Muslims. They were becoming nationally aware. They had the spirit of nationalism, and they became vocal through Congress, and that was the biggest fear of the colonial British rule. So once the Indian Hindus were the most favored people of the colonial British government, but during the partition of Bengal, we will find that the colonial British government was no longer in favor of the Indian Hindus. So the rising aspirations among the Bengali Babus became a matter of concern of the British government. In 1903, the reactionary regime of Lord Curzon proposed the partition of Bengal for administrative convenience. He was confronted with protest from every class of people, Hindus and Muslims. Later, his tour of East Bengal convinced him of the strength of Bengali nationalism and the danger it would be to the British rule. So he took measures to destroy the Bengali solidarity by partitioning it. So he said it was for the administrative um, reason, convenience of the British government, he would partition it, and we should remember that at that time the colonial government's Indian government's capital was in Calcutta. Later it was moved to Delhi. So the tactics of British imperialism in India to maintain its authority has always been the strategy of divide and rule. Hindu Muslim antagonism and communal riot was something which was not at all familiar or not at all existed, or it wasn't as frequent as it turned out to be under the British rule. So now the divide and rule policy emerges, and Lord Curzon says that the future of Great Britain will be decided not in Europe, not even upon the seas and oceans which are swept by her flag, or in the Greater Britain that has been called into existence by her offsprings, but in the continent whence our immigrant stock first came, and to which as conquerors their descendants have returned. Without India, the British Empire could not exist. In 1898, Lord Curzon wrote, "India is the pivot of our empire. If the empire loses any part of its dominion, we can survive. But if we lose India, the sun of our empire will be set." So in 1905, Lord Curzon, the Viceroy of India, wrote, "Administration and exploitation go hand in hand," and he proved it by partitioning India. So in 16th October 1905, Bengal was partitioned into two separate provinces. The whole of northern and eastern Bengal with Assam forming the province of Eastern Bengal and Assam, and Western Bengal and Bihar with Bihar and Orissa constituted the province of Bengal. So the motive was quite clear. In East Bengal, the Muslims were politically less advanced and more loyal to the British than the Hindus, who would be in a majority. While in Bengal, and the Bengalis would be a minority by the inclusion of Bihar and Orissa. Thus, the Bengalis would be divided from their kith and kin. The Bengali Hindus hated and dreaded by Curzon because of their education and political advancement. And so that's why they wanted to destroy the solidarity of the Bengalis. Mahatma Gandhi rightly remarked, "The partition of Bengal led to the partition of the British Empire." so which is led to the partition of the Indian society under the British rule. So Bengal witnessed, with the partition of Bengal, Bengal witnessed the rise of um, nationalism. And in your readings and in your PowerPoints, so I have just discussed the background of the Indian civilization and the partition of Bengal, and how the British came and they exploited and manipulated the Indian society for their own privilege. So in your reading and in the PowerPoints, there are sufficient information for you to understand the partition of Bengal, what sort of nationalism it took place, how the Hindu Bengalis reacted, and how the Muslims took it. There was some violent actions by the Bengalis because they protested against the partition. Then there were the rise of some rulers, Bengali leaders who protested against partition. But overall, in the scheme of things, the Hindu Babus, the Bengali Babus, were they were very they were economically affected because they used the Chittagong port for their trade, and this partition really hampered their economy in that respect. So economically, the Bengali Babus, who were the Hindu Bengalis, they were devastated because of the it brought economic disaster to them. But on the other hand, the main point of partition of Bengal was the rise of nationalism, where there was this the entire Bengali race was shaken. There were political meetings held. Bande Mataram was sang on streets, and then since the day the Rakhi Bandhan commemorated, Rabindranath Tagore circulated a letter to the public stating on the 30th Ashwin, 16th October, Bengal will be partitioned by legislation. To prove, however, that God did not ordain the severance of the race, it is proposed that the day should be commemorated by the observance of Rakhi Bandhan to indicate the undeniable unity of the Bengali race. So, so in your reading, you will find, so this is the rise of nationalism among the Bengalis. Then there was this, the Swadesi movement, the Swaraj, the Swadesi movement, all came to exist during this period. And Swadesi movement is like they endorsed the Bengalis. They endorsed their own products. They boycotted the British goods, and which had Britain had a very big market of Manchester cotton goods in British India, and the leaders, as I said, Gokhale, Tilak, Bipan Chandra Roy, they emerged, and they were very vocal against this partition. The Swadesi movement eventually led the Congress the concept of Swaraj or self-rule, and then there were some. You will see that there was some violence, terrorism, which the British government suppressed it, and so. But overall, of scheme of things, the Bengali Muslims were benefited. Sir Salimullah took this as the opportunity to develop Bengal, which was quite neglected compared to West Bengal, and so he did work on developing the Bengal, as you will see in your reading. What steps did he took for developing the Eastern Bengal, which is current Bangladesh, and Sir Salimullah, as we know, he was the Nawab of Dhaka and a student of the Aligarh College. So he knew this the the Sir Syed Ahmed Khan philosophy and ideology for the Muslims, and his Sir Syed Ahmed Khan attempt to work for the Muslims so that they can make progress, they become a progressive, educated group. That had an impact, I'm sure, on Sir Salimullah, and he took every steps to lot of improve the situation of the Bengali Muslims. Eventually, later, after the annulment of Partition of Bengal, Dhaka University was established, but the initiative was taken during this period. The Muslim League, that again shows the identity of the Muslim Indians, emerged in eastern Bengal. It was established, the Muslim League was established in 1906. Then there was the separate electorate, the Morley Minto reforms. It was it came into existence in 1909. So these are the progress during the partition of Bengal, and so there are two articles, readings, I think two or three, but please go through this partition of Bengal and its impact on Muslim education in Eastern Bengal, because during this time Eastern Bengal did make a lot of improvement in education, and that is what was needed. It was very timely that this progress was made because Sir Salimullah worked with the British government, gained the trust and loyalty of the British government, and he gained the trust from the British government. So it worked. He worked not for himself. He worked for the entire Bengali Muslims. So this is yes, of course, the entire Bengal was divided, and that was the solidarity was gone. But then again, Bengali Muslims were lagging behind, and this was a golden opportunity for the Bengali Muslims to make progress economically, politically, educationally, and culturally. So in your questions, in your exam questions, you need to there needs to be very critical thinking, the positives and negatives of the partition of Bengal, and again, so what do you think, whether it, I mean, you have to have some insight on the entire period from 1905 to 1911. As we go through other two lectures, then the next two lectures, you may be able to understand whether the partition of Bengal led to the partition of India, and the concept of identity and the identity politics, how much it played in the entire period from 1905 to 1907, the leadership issue, the economic issue, the political issue, several factors you need to think, and eventually, as we know, Bangladesh came emerged in 1971. So that was the consequence of partition of India. So there might be a question: the causes and consequences of partition of India. So you may have to think very hard. What have been the causes, and eventually what have been the consequence? Whether it was um, better history for the people of the Indian subcontinent, or whether it turned out to be good because the people of this region got their identity and their sense of belonging to their own nation. Thank you for today.